Jane to help us out with that. Is that fair, Corey? Corey Parent was also on the task force from the Senate. So we recruited Jane, and Jane did her magic and came up with where the money was coming from and how it was going to be applied to which fund. And so that's all I'm going to say right now, and then Jane will go through the money. And it's very complicated how to, and you have 3 handouts that one is the fiscal note, one is a piece on defined benefits, and one is 6 pages from the final report of the pension task force. So you have all that on your desk. So Jane, do you want to?
Sure, I'll start. And then first of all, I'd like to introduce Chris Rue, who's new to Joint Fiscal and spent his summer with the pension task force, and he got to wear a suit and tie when everybody else was more comfortable. And then Stephanie Barrett, who also is Joint Fiscal, and between Chris and Stephanie, were able to take all of the pieces and put them together. So I just wanted to recognize their presence, and if we have some question that we can't answer, since it's an informal, I'm going to be call on Chris or Stephanie to help us fill in the blanks. So one of the things that I would like to say started out, I was recruited. I guess I was assigned by the pro tem in December to step in because Senator White indicated they'd reached a point where they just had to see what we could do to make the numbers work, what would be sustainable. In the meantime, the pension committee had done a lot of work in terms of different options, the ways that they could reduce risk in terms of the COLA, reducing bands, increasing contributions. Teachers wanted more progressivity. So all of that work and getting the actuaries to, cost out or determine what would be the return for different policy options was really the work of the task force that preceded my arrival in December.
But can I say that the reason Jane wasn't on the task force to begin with was because when the legislation...
Why? Why wasn't I? I was not on the A-list.
December, you didn't want to spend all summer and fall. Because there was a clause in the bill last year that said no one who was a beneficiary could be on the task force. And since Jane is a retired state employee, she couldn't be on the task force.
Okay, that's
why.
Oh, all right. Well,
She got all our money.
35 years.
You loan us some?
So when I was started to get involved, based on the work that we've been doing in appropriations, it seemed to me that we really need to tackle 2 things. While the focus had been on pensions, we also had a problem with health care benefits for retirees. And all the retirees or all the employee representatives were saying our health care benefits are an important part of our economic security for when we retire as our pensions. And so as we had been working on the whole issue around underfunding, pensions were the topic of a lot of the press, but no one was thinking about the healthcare piece. And when I was asked to come in, I said, if we're going to get our fiscal house in order, we really have to deal with the 2 pieces of economic security for retirees. And the fact is we had benefits in place that we had not put forward a pre-funding mechanism for healthcare. Now for teachers, what we did was we paid on a pay-go basis their healthcare costs for retired teachers. But we used the corpus of the retirement fund. So actually, we were contributing to the underfunding by using those pension dollars to fund the health care. In 2015, we stopped that, and all that pay-go started being experienced, and the pressure was starting to go onto the general fund. So we knew that we needed to get into a different fiscal and financing arrangement to get into pre-funding. So you have the advantage of the investment returns, the compounding, Anybody who's watched Mary Poppins knows the power of compounding. So just to let you know, for teachers, when we started out, the healthcare funding on liability, unfunded liability is 1.5 billion, and their pensions was 1.95. That's on page 10, I believe, or it's in the fiscal note. On the other hand, for state employees, the underfunded liability for healthcare was greater than pensions because we hadn't used the state employees pension fund for their health care. But we were doing a pay-go, which is dollar for dollar, and it's really an expensive alternative. So in a couple of years past, we started thinking about how we're going to deal with this. And you may remember that we reserved $150 million to deal with pension unfunded liability. And we said we would reserve it and let the pension task force occur, and then the money would be held in reserve. We also, in closing out the end of the year, we had some money, 52.4, that was there for the state employees OPEB, which is essentially the healthcare benefit. And you may remember last year, we voted unanimously to start getting into pre-funding of teachers' healthcare for for currently employed teachers, so that we were getting into a pre-funding arrangement. We ended up reserving about $14 million, and we were going to have to work out how we were going to release that. So we were starting out with some pots of money that really helped us because we're anticipating how do we position ourselves financially to start tackling these two issues. And so we had a reserve in the education fund, the $14 million for pre-funding healthcare. And then we had 52.4, we ended up with the state employees' healthcare. And then we had the 150 million in reserve. So that was a good place to start. We learned that, first of all, how do we move, and we're within this framework, how do we start making, if we make payments here, what will be the impact somewhere else? And we know, we've calculated, I didn't calculate, but if we raise that 150 that we're holding in reserve for pension underfunding, added another 50 million, which the House did and reserved in their budget adjustment, we are appropriating here. So we are putting in a total of $200 million toward the underfunding. 75 is going toward state employees, 125 to teachers. And it makes sense because the underfunding of pensions is higher there. And then by making that one-time payment, we are having a beneficial impact in fiscal year 24 on the amortized liability payment that we have to make. So it will reduce that payment by 19.5 million. That's all in your book on the fiscal note. And so what we're saying is we're going to take that savings that we are going to experience from that reduced amortized payment and use it to start adding to what all the employees were saying, teachers and employees were saying was so important, and that is we are willing to contribute more for our pension system, but we would like to have the ADEC, which is the annual, contribution made by the employer. We would like a plus. So that's how we were going to create a funding source for the plus by taking the money that we were saving on those amortized payments and applying it. And obviously it was going to take a little while to get out, but what we are committed to is at reaching out a cap of 15 million plus for the normal ADEC. So to give you some idea, the normal ADEC for state employees this year is 36.8 and teachers is 42.1. So when you look at the contributions that the employees are making relative to that normal retirement cost, you can see it's not an inconsequential amount of funding. through increased contributions, through a delay when their COLA will kick in, being increased, and reducing the band of the COLA from, I think it was 1 to 5 to 0 to 4. But that was work that was done before I arrived. So what we have in this bill really are unreserving the 150, unreserving the 13.3, and then and appropriating the 50 million that we will use. And the reason we wanted to move that forward is so that we are sure to get the beneficial impact on that amortized payment in FY24. And so by keeping the current level of funding within this sort of box, and what we're going to have for available money because of the increased contributions, as well as there will continue to be an impact in terms of amortized liability, and those payments will go down as we continue to make progress. So what we were doing is taking money that we were saving in one place, we're saying we'll keep the level of commitment, but this will give us the opportunity to put our house in order to deal with the healthcare piece. So I just want to stress that again, because almost a lot of the savings, and if you read the editorials, it's talking about, well, that's because that underfunded liability is you have to calculate at a higher percentage, et cetera. It's still being carried on the state's books as an unfunded liability. And so between what we're doing on pensions and what we're doing on healthcare benefits, is about a $2 billion reduction on the state's bottom line. And the one thing that I would simply point out is that currently state employees get 100% of the COLA increase. Teachers only were getting 50%. Something that was important for them was to move the 50% up and at some point get to parity with state employees. There is going to be a provision, and there is an amendment that we'll put in tomorrow that deals with, and it's going to be it's the end of year construct about how we would deal with that without creating from an actuarial perspective the need to account for a potential benefit if and when it might happen. So we are going to, in addition to the ADEC plus getting into pre-funding of the normal health care for both teachers and state employees. We also said at the end of the year, rather than we were going to change if there was a surplus right now, half of that surplus went to state employees' health care, OPEB. Because we're into pre-funding now, that payment didn't make sense anymore because we were paying that cost in a different way. So we said at the end of the year, if there's a surplus, rather than 50% going to OPEB, 50% would go toward retirements, split equally between teachers and state employees, 25-25. And so that's, tomorrow there'll be an amendment that will deal with that, because the teachers wanted to move from 50% increments of 7.5% up to getting to parity over whatever period of time. And there's also there are protections in there that if the fund is not funded at an adequate level, nothing happens. They're not automatic increases in the COLA. There has to be fiscally sound and funding of the pension fund to ever move it, into the next increment of 7.5%. So that is really what this bill does. Because a pension laws, I guess the language is all over the place. It's quite a large bill. But I would like to say that this was, even though I came in kind of at the end, it was something that we were able to put together in terms of what we could do financially. I can tell you what the plus was requested was much greater than we felt that we could ever commit to, that we would have the ability to fund. So that was the point of discussion. I said, we could move it up and cap it out at 15 million. And that was in the end, what was agreed to. And so I do want to say that it was a good process at the point we were getting into really the details and how we could make this work, how we could take the higher contributions, how we can continue to take the money that we were currently having in our baseline budget for pensions and health care and to make the additional payments now. This year, there's a little money one time that we're going to have to put into health care simply because we're not getting the full return yet from the higher contributions being made by employees. So it's a multi-year period maxing out to the 15 million plus, as well as the amount that we have to put in toward the pre-funding of the healthcare benefits. So I think that's sort of what this bill does. The other thing that I think is really important, one, I guess I don't have a conflict of interest on this because I've been appointed to the Pension Oversight Committee. If there's anything I would say, I was here, and it was like, how could we have not been fully funding teachers' retirement? And when we had a waterfall and we were funding grand pianos and, whatever, I don't think we had, we just got the letter from the treasurer saying this is the amount of the ADEC, or this is, the unfunded liability. If there's anything, I would say, that we have learned a painful lesson, and that is to defer, underfund an obligation because it compounds. And you're going to hear from the teacher's perspective, we did underfund the normal ADEC, but that stopped. And it stopped way back, I think, in 2009. But what happens is the ADEC, when you make certain assumptions, so that's the other thing that the pension task force will be looking at, and that is, what is the return on investments? There is a special investment committee now with the expertise that wasn't there before. So the rate of returns were on the investments were less than stellar. So I think I would say that this multi-year process that I've gone through, remember we moved to the education fund, the cost of normal retirement costs to the education fund for teachers who are currently teaching, and trying to get the cost for responsibility to the right funding source. The one thing I will say is the normal cost to the education fund, we're not asking to pick up any of the underfunding. That is still remaining with the general fund. It's just for the cost of the system now, and healthcare and pension benefits, just like any other benefits, are just going to be part of the cost of our operation of our K through 12 system. So I'm going to stop there. The financing here is just really, there's going to be money for the pre-funding of the healthcare. That'll be in the budget. And but we are unreserving money here and doing a direct appropriation of the additional $50 million to get to the $200 million, just so that we can start generating the savings in the form of the reductions to the underfunded liability in FY24. So that's, I hope, straightforward. There's a very detailed, I want to thank Chris Cruz and Stephanie, that's right. And it's on your desk. There has been a lot of discussion about, one of the things that was talked about is pension structure and defined benefit versus defined contribution. There's a one pager, because I know that I thought it's kind of helpful to answer questions about the difference in the plan and something that might be helpful. And I think with that, it's almost 1 o'clock and we're probably going to session. So other questions will be around. Are we presenting them this afternoon?
Yeah.
Oh, all right. Well, I'll just I don't know what I'll say. It's all about the money.
You didn't do it.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Jenna.
Thank you. Get my coffee.